The Gentiles. Concerning the lot of nations and peoples outside the church, see what has been written in Arcana Celestia, Numbers 2589 to 2604, and in the work on heaven and hell, Numbers 318 to 328. Also something in the little work on the last judgment, Numbers 47 to 51. That a new heaven has been formed both from Christians and from Gentiles, and also the Lord's church on earth, see the doctrine of the New Jerusalem, Number 3, 244 to 246. About the time of the last judgment, Christians appeared there in the middle, where they were arranged at a distance from the center to the circumference, and also at the various quarters, according to the light of truth from the love of good. Around this middle were seen the Mohammedans, arranged in like manner at the various quarters, near to the Christians, according to the light of truth from good. Outside this compass were seen the Gentiles, arranged according to their religion and according to life therefrom. All have similar lands, divided into mountains, hills, rocks, and valleys, and above them are expanses where dwell the best of them, who have received from angels truths of doctrine concerning the Lord and concerning life. Beyond them appeared as it were a sea, which was the boundary. All these circuits taken together are extended not in a plane but in a globe like the earth, so that when I was conducted to the Gentiles, after passing through the Mohammedans, I descended by a declivity. When the last judgment was going on, those who were in the western quarter, beyond the Mohammedans, were led away towards the east. They were led not by a circuit, but above the northern plain of the Christians, and what I wondered at, on high, so that they were transferred by a way above the Christians, and yet did not communicate with them. And they were then allotted places around the Mohammedans at the east, and also at the south. On both sides of where the Mohammedan heavens are, there appeared openings descending into the depths. Thither were cast those of them who were evil, who had worshipped idols, and had thought nothing about God, and at the same time had lived an evil life. There is also a similar chasm on the northern side of the Mohammedan desert. Into this were cast the worst, and also many of the Roman Catholic religion, who had worshipped the images of saints, and had thought nothing at all about the Lord. These latter were gathered from the northern quarter, under the mountains there, and were mingled with the Gentiles, because they are similar. I then saw the whole northern valley, even to the mountains there, torn up to its foundations, and all who were there scattered, and then there appeared in that place, as it were, a smokiness. I was afterwards led beyond the Mohammedans to certain Gentiles who were in the eastern quarter, with whom it was granted to speak. They said that they were sad because the divine does not appear to them, when yet they think of the divine and speak about it. And therefore, if there is a God, they had hoped, that he would send to them those who would teach them, but that they had long waited for this in vain, lamenting that perchance he had deserted them, and that thus there seemed nothing else for them but to perish. And then I heard angels speaking with them out of heaven, saying that God could not have been manifested to them, because they had not been willing to believe that God was born a man in the world, or that he had taken on a human, and that until they believe this, God cannot be manifested to them, nor can they be taught, because this is the primary thing of all revelation. They said that they did indeed believe that God is man, but that they could not comprehend that he was born man in the world. But answer was made them that he was not born man like any other man, since he was not born from a human father, but from the Father Jehovah, and by a virgin, and that thus he was unlike any other man. For a man's soul from a human father is a recipient of life, but the Lord's soul from the Father Jehovah is life itself, which gives life to all, and that the difference is as between the human and the divine, and the finite and the infinite, or the create and the uncreate. And because he was such as to his soul, it could not be otherwise than that his body should become like his soul, after he had rejected that of the body which he had taken from the mother, and that therefore he rose as to his whole body, nor did he leave anything of it in the sepulchre, as is the case with every other man, who rises only as to his spirit and never as to his material body. And further, it was said that the divine itself, as it is in itself, which is infinite, could not have done otherwise than reject the finite, which was from the mother, and put on the infinite from the Father, thus the divine. They said that they had known no other than that he was like any other man born from a human father, and also that he so died, and was afterwards received by men as God, and that they now know that the Lord is not such a man as others are. After they received these things, they were divided, and those who had received the faith were instructed by angels in other matters of faith and love. I was conducted to those who in the world had known nothing about God, but who nevertheless had led a moral life amongst each other. They were said to live on a certain island. They appeared to me not like men but like apes, and yet with a human face. They so appeared because they knew nothing about God, and the divine is in the likeness of a man. One of the Christians is set over them by the Lord. I have spoken with him, and he said that they obey him and love him, that they are modest, and are engaged in employments, but that at first they could hardly comprehend the things of religion. But after some time there was given them a nearer communication with the Christians, and they are beginning to receive something of religion, and he cherished the hope that they could be reformed, for the reason that they had lived a moral life, and are in obedience, and are industrious. As to similar people elsewhere, see below. There were likewise seen others who had lived in an island in the West Indian seas, who had no thought at all about God, thus no religion, and who yet had lived together in a sincere and friendly way. It was told me that at first they appear destitute of rationality, but that nevertheless, because they had contracted no false principles against religion, some of them suffer themselves to be instructed like infants, and they are perfected. It was shown that the delight of their life was to will to serve others under others. Some wealth was once given them, but they offered it to the angel who was instructing them, in order that he might receive them as his servants, that thus they may be instructed as to how they should live. It is an angelic delight to inform such spirits and to lead them to heaven. I was once in a sweet sleep, and when I awoke I saw around me some Chinese, and I noticed that they sat with their legs crosswise, and were talking with each other. And it was ascertained that they had been sent to me by the Lord, in order that I might know of what quality many of them are. The angels said that the delightfulness of my sleep had inflowed from the fact that angels had been speaking with them about God, and about the wonderful things of wisdom, and that they had been so delighted at this, that they had been in the tranquillity of some celestial peace, and that evil spirits could not approach, because they were of a spiritual celestial genius. There were with me some spirits from Tartary, who dwelt outside the Chinese wall, saying that their country is populous, nor do they know anything about war, saying that they are without the love of reigning, and that they give the government to those who say they can rule and govern. But if he cannot, he is rejected with a fine. Those who do what is right and just are loved. They said that all are engaged in work, and that the lazy are cast out. They say that sometimes Christians come to them, and they marvel at their saying that God is a man, for they believe that all men know this. They also say that they have the commandments of the Decalogue, and that they live according to them because God so wills. They said that they have a holy book of which others do not know, and which they understand. Inquiry was made, and it was the Psalms of David. They call the Chinese their friends because they are of their nation. Nor do they think of war, saying that if any strangers should come, then, unknown to them, they would all depart, taking their provisions with them. I also saw a Christian preacher with the spirits of that region. They are of a tranquil disposition. The last judgment on the Protestants or Reformed. Before the last judgment, which was a general one, less general judgments preceded, which might be called preparatory, by which those who were more exteriorly evil were cast into hells. It should be known that between the judgment effected by the Lord when he was in the world, and that of the judgment which is now effected, spirits who had outwardly lived a moral life, and had confessed God with the lips, but not interiorly or in heart, had ascended upon mountains and hills, and had there made for themselves, as it were, heavens, where by various arts, which are very numerous in the spiritual world, all of them unknown in our world, they had ascended on mountains, so that the world of spirits, which is mediate between heaven and hell, had been filled up with such heavens, and thereby the communication of the Lord and heaven with the human race had been intercepted. This also was the reason why the spiritual things of the word, and of doctrine therefrom, were not disclosed until after the last judgment. For by the latter the world of spirits was purified, and communication with man opened. If the spiritual things of the word and of doctrine therefrom had been disclosed before, they would not have been received nor understood. And if they had been received and understood, still hell, which then prevailed, would have secretly snatched them away from men's hearts, and have profaned them. Those fictitious heavens are meant in the Apocalypse by the heaven and earth which passed away. These could pass away, but our visible heaven, which is the firmament of all things, was so created that it cannot pass away. For if this should pass away, the angelic heavens would also pass away. It would be as when the foundation is taken away from a palace, or the base from a column, whereby the house and the column would fall. For there is a connection of all things, from the first to the last, from the Lord himself to his last work, which is the visible heaven and the habitable earth. The case would be similar if the human race were to perish, for thus, for a like reason, the angelic heavens would also fall to ruin. Before the last judgment, I often saw societies, which had made for themselves semblances of heavens, purged and also destroyed. There was one rock on which was quite a large city, where those who were in faith separate from charity, believing as in the world, that faith alone saves, and this from mere mercy whatsoever the life may have been. They were in the lust of commanding, and therefore they stood at the sides of the rock, and in various ways infested those who were beneath. When such visitation was made, and all there were found to be of such a character, I saw that the rock sank down into the depths, together with the hill and the inhabitants. The like was done elsewhere. But prior to this being done, the good are separated from the evil, and the evil are in the middle, and then the middle sinks down, while the borders remain. In the borders are those who are in the good of faith, that is, who are in charity. All who have not denied God with the lips, although they have in the heart, and have led a moral life on account of the civil laws, and also on account of reputation, and consequent honours and gains, when they come into the other life, betake themselves into societies where there are cities, and there, as in the world, they live well morally, from fear of punishment, and of the loss of honour and gain. But when their externals are taken away from them, and they are let into their internals, they rush into infamous crimes. But when the wicked increase in number, the society is then perverted, wherefore angels are then sent thither, who search out the state, and separate the good from the evil, and the good are either sent to the sides of the society, or are taken away. Then the city with the evil sinks down into hell, to a depth according to their wickedness. Once I saw that 4 angels were sent to such a city, who, when they came thither, entered into a house. But the criminal spirits who were there, being excited by their presence into interior malice, as takes place, rushed to the house where the angels were, shouting out to them. Did they wish to come out and commit whoredom? They wished to urge them to it, and even attempted to offer violence, but in vain. In a word, they did like what was done in Sodom. And that city was completely destroyed, and its inhabitants cast into hells. The reason why they wished to lead them forth to commit whoredom was because in that city were gathered those who in the world had accounted adulteries as allowable, also because they had been in falsities of doctrine, by reason of having regarded life as of no account. Moreover, to confirm these things, they had falsified the word, and all those who falsify the word, in order to confirm evils of life, and falsities of doctrine, account adulteries as allowable, and are led into them. I saw also a rock, on which there had been such a city, torn up from its place and carried away to another place at a remarkable distance. It appeared carried away like a cloud, and when it came to that place, I saw that it also sank down, because there was their hell. The inhabitants had been first reduced into a state of stupor. A great number of those who are in faith separate from charity betake themselves to rocks, while those who are in the love of self betake themselves to mountains which are higher than the rocks. Hence it is that in the word a rock signifies faith, and a mountain love. And when, before the last judgment, the evil had been thus gathered together upon rocks and upon mountains, first there were suddenly felt concussions and earthquakes, by which are meant perversions of state in respect to the church, and afterwards follows the overturning, which is effected either by sinking, or by carrying away, or by casting out, and thus thrusting down into hell. On the mountains and hills upon which are angels, the wisest are in the middle, and the less wise at the circumferences, but on those upon which are the evil, the worst are in the middle, and the better at the circumferences. The sinking in the middle appears like a vertical gyration, but in a spiral. There was a plain somewhat more elevated than the valley. In this plain was congregated a multitude of spirits who had learned to practice evils by means of cunning, and to station themselves invisible behind others, and thus force them to think and speak what they wish them to, yea, evils and falsities. They have contracted these arts by reason of their having been in the insane love of ruling over others. As it was then disclosed that their wickedness was consummated, their destruction followed. The whole of that plain was overturned, and the earth was then opened elsewhere, and there rose up good spirits who had been kept concealed by the Lord in the lower earth, and guarded, lest they should be infested by the evil. And they succeeded in place of the former, and came in full number into possession of their land. Such things are represented by the sons of Israel, to whom the land of Canaan was given, after the wickedness of its nations had been consummated. After many destructions and partial judgments had been executed, which were premonitory of the general destruction and judgment, and hordes of spirits who were impure had been cast into pools, lakes, and chasms, that is, into hells, then some came who were skilled in the art of breathing into others, and exciting them to evils of interior thought. They incited some souls against the Lord, and against divine truth from him, and from these the multitude, like one mass, began to be fermented. The tumult spread thence in every direction, as when a rebellion is started by a few persons, and yet at length stirs up a crowd. I there saw the disturbance widely spread to many rocks and mountains, even to their peaks, and thence to the sides, down to the bases. Their intent was to destroy those who acknowledged and worshipped the Lord, and were in divine truths from him. When it was noticed that the contagion had grown so wide, then was the Lord's coming for the general judgment. This coming was the Lord's influx into them through the heavens, an influx which appeared like a misty sphere spread around over those mountains and rocks, and it carried off the dwellers there, not by casting them down, but by bearing them away. The divine sphere entered into their interiors, and laid them bare, and what lay concealed in their will and heart was thus made manifest. And it snatched them away, and carried them down to hells according to the evils of their life. That divine sphere was seen carried around in gyres, sometimes returning, and it also drew them out of the places where they had concealed themselves. This was done with some myriads, within the space of an hour. When these things had been accomplished, the tops of the mountains receded, and the mountains themselves sank down even to the plain, and there was seen a solitude. Such things are meant in the Apocalypse by the former heaven and the former earth which John saw pass away, for the mountains there, with the rocks and valleys, appear like the earth in our world, and the habitations upon the mountains are there called heavens. Those who were thus carried off and cast away are they who are meant in the Apocalypse by the dragon and his two beasts, chapters 12 and 13, and by the false prophet who was cast into the lake of brimstone and fire, chapter 19, verse 20, and chapter 20, verse 10. The judgment upon the Protestants or Reformed was effected as follows. They who had led a life of charity, which may also be called a life of faith, had all been carried up into heaven long before the universal judgment, and all who in heart had denied heaven and had led an evil life had been cast by turns into hell as they came from the world. On those only was the judgment effected, who had professed religion, and had acted as if from religion, but only hypocritically. To these it was conceded to gather themselves together in many places in the spiritual world, and, as in the world, to simulate religion, but still they had no religion. These are they who made heavens for themselves, and who are meant by the former heaven and the former earth, and by means of arts unknown in the world, they are able to produce splendid things, and to persuade those who are similar that they are in heaven. Their exteriors communicated with the ultimate heaven, but their interiors with the hells, and it was on account of the communication with the ultimate heaven that they were tolerated, according to the Lord's words concerning the pulling up of the tares. The angels of the ultimate heaven were first separated from them, and the communication was broken, as takes place comparatively with seeds in fruits when they ripen, in that when the time comes for them to produce a new tree, they separate themselves, as it were spontaneously, from the body of the fruit. All the Protestants, or Reformed, of whom there was still some hope, were collected in the middle, where they were arranged according to their kingdoms in the world. For according to these were also the diversities of their dispositions or affections. But above them, and also around them, were those who had read the word, and had frequented temples, but yet had made nothing of evils of life, loving themselves and the world above all things. There was an immense multitude there. Surrounding the middle region, in which were Christians who had been in the good of faith and charity, were dark caverns stretching obliquely into hells, which occupied a wide space below the heaven of spirits, where were hells beneath hells. Such gulfs and chasms lay around that middle region on every side, east, west, south, and north. Thus the hells extended even under the circuit made by the Papists round about the Reformed. All who were interiorly evil had been disposed around the Christian middle, and from every quarter they were led down into those gulfs and cast into them. Thus into the eastern gulf were cast those who had been collected from the east. They were such as had been in the love of self, and especially in the love of ruling, nor had known anything whatever except that faith alone is saving. Into the southern gulf were cast those who had been versed in the doctrinals of faith, into the western gulf those who had been in the love of the world, and into the northern those who had been in no understanding, but had merely heard preachings, and had received no instruction afterwards. Those at the south were led down first, then those at the west, and lastly those at the east. This happened at the same time that the eastern Papists were being led down beyond the northern tract. When this had been done, their dwellings were laid waste and destroyed. Afterwards I saw an immense number of those who had lauded faith alone, and yet had possessed no faith, because they had paid no attention to the evils of their life, both the learned and the unlearned, saying that they have the word and the true doctrine, that they know the Lord, and many other things, and that therefore they, above others, would be saved. They were led away in a multitude, first to the west, afterwards to the south, on the other side of the waste Babylonish tract there, and even towards the east, and still further. And they were divided. Some were scattered towards the north, nor were they seen any more. And many were led back, but hither and thither this transfer was effected in order that they might be explored as to whether they had any faith, such as they boasted of, namely, whether their faith was only a science, which is not faith, or whether there was anything of life in it, which is faith. And it was given them to perceive that they had no faith, but only something scientific without life. When they were in the southern quarter, near a gulf there came forth a multitude which had been concealed there from early times, who likewise said that they had had faith, and that they would be saved by reason of faith alone. And they had thought nothing about life. This multitude then approached them and was mingled with them. From a certain mountain region a multitude was brought forth, who had led a moral life, not from any religion, but merely from fear of the law, and of the loss of fame, honor, and gain, thus without any Christian life. Wherefore, so far as they could do it unknown, they perpetrated evils. Because they had not acquired to themselves any communication with heaven by means of a life from religion, they were led around to the southern and western quarters, that they might be explored as to whether they had any religion of life, and because they had none, they were rejected. Finally came those who had been versed in the doctrinals of the church, and in like manner had led a moral but not a Christian life, because they had lived not from doctrine, or the word, but for the sake of fame, thus before men and not before God. And being explored, it was seen that they had nothing of conscience, because nothing of the religion of life. These were cast out of that mountain region. All these, who were divided into the three classes, were driven so far away that they could not be seen, except as a dark cloud, and they were dissipated. It was told me from heaven that they were cast down into uninhabited and desert places, and thus were separated, lest they should consociate together. The dispersion of these three classes was made to all the quarters, east, south, west, and north, whence they can never return, and this all the more, since every knowledge of religion is taken away from them. Concerning life in deserts, see elsewhere. The angels wondered that there is so great a multitude in the Christian world who are entirely ignorant of the truth that religion is a matter of life, imagining that religion consists in thinking something or other, and that by thus thinking they absolve themselves from every obligation of life, which they have made up from this, that by the Lord's merit they are exempt from the yoke of the law, and that no one can do good from himself, and that if he does, it is meritorious. And yet this is so far from religion of life that it is no religion at all. But all who have thought with themselves that evil must not be done because it is sin, and is against divine laws, and who thus, so far as they could, have abstained from evils, all these have received something of conscience, and in the things which were of their faith, although they were spurious, there was much life, and they were saved. The cleansing of the middle where the reformed were lasted a long time, and those who were in the church without the church in themselves, or without doctrine and religion in themselves, were by turns cast into the gulfs surrounding the middle, and many of them into deserts. These cleansings lasted for a long time after the judgment. I once saw many spirits sitting around a table in a certain house, who looked like rich merchants, and still more spirits were approaching, so that there were quite a number of them. In face they appeared as though upright, and they were clothed as though they were angelic spirits. But I saw that they were all cast into desert places and into woods, thus outside the societies of the upright. The reason was stated, namely, because in the world they had lived in external form like Christians, and had acted well, but this solely for the purpose of acquiring a reputation for sincerity and honesty, in order to make gain therefrom, and that they had not done the least thing for the sake of God or the neighbor, but all for the sake of themselves, and that therefore they had no communication with heaven. Hence it is that they were cast out thither, where they roam about amongst robbers, and themselves commit robbery. For when external bonds are taken away from such spirits, they become robbers. They were robbers even in the world, were it not that externals, which are fears for the loss of fame and hence of gain, held them in bonds. In the western quarter was seen a multitude whose speech sounded sincere, so that from their speech they might be thought to be, as it were, sincerities. By their speech and reasonings concerning sincerity, they could induce the simple to believe that they were of such a character. But still it was found out that within they were like wolves, because without religion, and hence without conscience. I have heard them consulting together as to how the simple might be deceived, and their goods stolen away from them. Some were consulting to do this, in order that they might thus obtain dominion. And then they assailed them from behind, and inspired evils into them, for in this way they are able to subjugate. But their doings were seen in heaven, and they were cast into a hell about the western tract of the middle region, for they were insincerities, and also wickednesses, devisers of arts with the end of gain and dominion. Afterwards those of the Reformed were explored, 1, as to what idea of God they had, 2, who had led merely a life of piety, 3, who had frequented temples, and made themselves guilty of all sins, but had not explored themselves, 4, who believed that they had led a Christian life, in that they had lived well morally because of the civil laws, and 5, who had been hypocrites. They were explored as to what idea they had concerning God. It was found that they had thought only of God the Father, and of the Lord as like themselves. This is their belief, that the Father has compassion for the Son's sake, and they had then thought nothing concerning the divine of the Lord. Thus, when they thought of one God, they had not at the same time thought of the Lord. When yet the Father cannot be approached, since no one seeth him but the Son alone, and that the Lord is the way, thus that the Father is to be approached by him, and that faith must be a faith in him, and not in the Father. Hence, they could have no determinate idea of God except of wind, or ether, or as of nature in its leasts. And there is no divine idea of the Lord when he is thought of as a common man. The angels complained that they were disturbed by their idea, which was communicated to them, and very many of these spirits were brought down into the quarters round about, and the places to which they came then appeared gloomy, for the true idea of God makes clearness itself. Some of them were brought into places underneath, according to their life, some in order that they might be further informed. And then only those who have lived well receive a divine idea concerning the Lord. I saw that those succeeded to their place who had been kept concealed by the Lord, lest they be hurt by the contagion. These are meant in the Apocalypse by those who were slain and were delivered out of the sepulchres. Afterwards I saw those who had led a life merely of piety, and in idleness led away from the others. They had been continually in prayers, and not at all in truths, merely knowing that salvation is from mercy, and that sins are remitted, but knowing nothing as to what sin is. They had despised others in comparison with themselves, and had also condemned them on account of cares of the world. Most of them had placed merit in prayers. Of these also the angels made complaint, especially because they induce sadness upon them. They dwelt at the side, wherefore they were driven away to their own places. There they retain their worship, but they are driven to work. They were brought down into the northern plain, because they were in ignorance of such things as lead to heaven. Hypocrites, who have spoken well concerning God, the neighbor, and the country, but in themselves have thought the contrary, were explored and cast into hell. They wished to speak well concerning the Lord's kingdom, and concerning heaven, for this is then the country, but their interior thought was explored, which was for themselves alone, and against the rule of the country. Wherefore, when they were let into their interiors, they perpetrated criminal things. They were cast into the hells, being first deprived of all that they had drawn from the word, and from doctrines by which they had deluded others. Preachers who know something of the doctrine of their church, and after they have been instructed in the schools, and have come into their functions, no longer care for it, nor for the word, except that they may preach and be elevated to higher offices, or may gain wealth, and thus who live in ease, and are merely worldly and not Christians, these are sent into a hell in the northern quarter towards the west, far from the middle, where a dense fog is seen, and they then become stupid. All are separated according to their life, thus according to their affections, not according to their external life, but according to their internal. For this is the life of the thought from will or affection, and no one has internal life except from religion. External life is from morality and the state, and according to its laws. Wherefore moral life, unless it draws its quality from spiritual life, and thereby change its appearance, is not spiritual life with any man. Consequently there is no conjunction with heaven, and they who are not conjoined with heaven are conjoined with hell. And in such case, although in the world they have not done evil, yet after their departure from the world they do evil from delight. Thus their state is changed. Concerning the dragonists. Who are meant by the dragon may be deduced from what has been said in the explanation of the Apocalypse, also that by the tail of the dragon is meant faith separate from charity, which drew down the stars from heaven, that is, the knowledges of good and truth. The dragonists were separated, many of them, when in the world had been priests, who had confirmed themselves in faith separate from charity. They were explored in various ways, as by the inspection in light of the back of the head. With those who are merely natural, and hence infernal, the back of the head is filthy, hollowed out, and altogether bony. They are led down to places where they are deprived of the exteriors which have been induced on their faces by art, and the face is regarded according to the affections, and the interior thoughts thence. What was human in their face is then taken away, and something diabolical succeeds in its place. They are also explored by being turned to the east, and thus to the Lord. And then from the east there flows in a spiritual affection concerning the Lord. And then they instantly turn themselves back again to the west, like a spring, which recoils when it has been twisted backwards. In this way also angels explore newcomers to their heavenly societies. There are also some who desire to hear truths. They believe they are saved if only they know them. But when they hear that truths are for the sake of life, and that so far as truths of life become actual, so far truths of faith also live, they then depart, feeling the utmost disgust for life, but not so for the truths which are of faith, because these they can talk about. The truths of faith which do not live, unless truths of life become actually such, may be enumerated, and it may be mentioned which are truths of faith and which truths of life. Everyone can see that charity consists in not stealing from anyone, either by artifice or openly, that charity consists in being wholly unwilling to commit adultery with the wife of another, that charity consists in not doing injury to the neighbor in hatred and revenge, that charity consists in not reviling another, and so forth. He who abhors these things as sins has charity, for he loves the neighbor. Afterwards I saw an immense number, both sent forth from the heavens and rising up from below, and also of those who had been left, who were allotted their places, mansions, and habitations. In the east, those in the clear good of love and of charity. At the west, those in the obscure good of love and of charity. At the south, those in truths from good in clearness, and at the north, those in truths from obscure good, all acknowledging the Lord as the God of heaven and earth. Many in the Christian world were also cast down, who had an understanding of truth, but not a will of good. In the beginning, such spirits are accepted among the upright because they can speak about many things, even truths. Moreover, in the beginning the understanding with them is enlightened, but the will is laid to sleep. Such spirits were collected together on the mountains in the western quarter. They league themselves with the upright who are in the ultimate heaven, who do not inquire as to things of the will, but believe that those who speak intelligently are also good. But I saw such spirits that they were altogether devoid of charity, and they secretly consociate with the evil, and, first by reasonings and afterwards by arts, they infest the upright, until they are conjoined and devoted to themselves, for in this way they prevail against others. Many such were in heavens, which they had made for themselves, and they interposed themselves between the Lord and man in the world, and so obstructed the way that the divine operation could not have its force. Very many of this character are in the pride of self-intelligence from the love of self, and in the delight of domineering. I once saw such spirits in a somewhat high mountain in the western quarter toward the north, and everywhere round about on the sides of the mountain, and they persuaded themselves and others that one is in heaven from mere intellectual light, and not at the same time from heavenly heat. They are most dangerous. I saw them cast down from the mountain, and from the sides of the mountain, and a gulf underneath opened itself and swallowed them up, and they sank deep down, and were let into darkness. For they then received falsities in place of truths, and turned themselves to things contrary. Such is the understanding which is led by an evil will. The evil, who had conjoined themselves with them, because they no longer had the power of resistance, were cast down into their various hells, some into hells under the mountains, others into hells under the plains. Those who were in faith separate rose up in insurrection, exciting a rebellion well nigh universal. Their dogma and their learned leaders rose up against those who acknowledged the Lord and a life of love from him. They stirred up all except those who were in the eastern quarter. These were guarded by the Lord, even to certain Mohammedans who were in the northern quarter. They sent forth companies of 50 to many places in order that they might stir up those who were there, and those who remained and directed were divided into companies of 10. Their purpose was to destroy all those who acknowledged the Lord alone and worked together with faith as being saving. Almost all of them were without religion, and hence without conscience. But when they set out to do this, and were in the endeavor to destroy others that were evil, a force flowed down from on high, or from heaven, by which they were cast down to the hells, to a number exceeding many thousands. They also conjoined themselves with papists, and with monks who in the world had proclaimed themselves Christs, and had thought nothing of the Lord's divinity. When the whole crew had been cast down, the leaders were taken, and they became black as devils both within and without. And they became so monstrous that they would be scarcely recognized as men. For man is such as he is as to life. He who is black as to life afterwards becomes black even from head to heel. It was found that they had not rebelled from zeal, on account of the doctrine of faith alone, but from the delight of ruling and of doing evil for the sake thereof. This was the combat of Michael with the dragon, for all such who have insinuated themselves into heaven are drawn forth thence and cast down. They are Michael, who worship the Lord, and who make works, conjoined with faith, saving. For since the one is not given without the other, therefore they save conjointly. The combat of the dragon with Michael was afterwards as follows, for it lasted some days. A hand was seen, stretched out over the heavens by the Lord. In the western quarter towards the west, there appeared as it were a great back, raised above the middle towards heaven. Angels in immense number were seen there. In that entrance were the dragonists, and they spoke with them concerning the Lord, and concerning the goods of charity, and thence of faith. All then turned towards them to hear what they would say, and the dragonists were forced into the thoughts concerning the Lord and concerning faith alone, which they had in the world. And then most of them had no divine idea of the Lord, nor any idea of charity and works. The angels answered them wisely on this matter, but in vain. They said, moreover, that all the angels in the heavens do not perceive the matter thus, but it was in vain. And at last, after the combat, when the dragonists were only willing to give further response outside of the matter or the truth, but could not, they were adjudged to be cast down from every place where such spirits were. But when they said they would resist, the Lord was seen descending from the sun in a bright cloud, and he gave judgment that all who were found to be such should be separated and alienated. and then they were cast down successively and by turns according to the connection of the societies of heaven. Towards the western quarter an immense number, and 1,000 then appeared as one. The grievous collision of truth and falsity, which pertained to temptation, was felt within me. The whole western quarter was full of such spirits who had been cast down from the heavens, and then the earth was seen to open, and they were cast down and were covered over with a dense cloud. They were all such as would never have abstained from thinking and willing evils, but only from doing them, by reason of fear. This happened in 1757, on the 11th day of April. From the southern quarter to the western, the dragonists were seen in a curved line under the figure of a tail. At the south there were those who had been skilled in the degrees of justification, and had confirmed these with themselves. The Lord's heaven was first inherited by such as had acknowledged him, and had lived well, who had had heaven in themselves. Afterwards succeeded those who wished merely to have heaven outside themselves. To these latter it was also granted to make heavens for themselves, which they called heaven, when they saw the magnificent things, such as palaces, porticos, paradises, and many serviceable things. But since their internals were not in correspondence, such things disappeared. And then by fantasies and the abuses of correspondences, and by many arts, they provided for themselves things similar. This did not last long, however, for they placed everything in delicacies and in bodily pleasures, and thus they became wholly external, such as they had been in the world. And then came the judgment, after which followed continual purifications of the societies from such spirits. Many of those who are in faith alone, because they have no conjunction with heaven, but all conjunction with hell, are in the love of ruling. They are explored in the following way. From the societies of heaven they look down to the places beneath, and where they see spirits, whether many or few, walking about there, they rule their thoughts, infest them in various ways, and by fantasies cause many things to appear to them to which they are led. Their joy is to precipitate them into hells. They are of such a character that they do not want to be led, but to lead. This is their delight. Wherefore they cannot be led by the Lord, for the Lord leads through the affection of use, and this is not their affection. With them use is to domineer, and therefore they successively deny the Lord, and rely upon arts, which are many, by which they have dominion. They put their trust in their own prudence, and ascribe nothing to the divine providence, and when the reins are loosened, they rush finally into such a state that they think there is no God. And yet inseated in them is the purpose of domineering over heaven, and to be there in place of God. This is inseated in the love of ruling for the sake of self. I once saw that a certain spirit in a small society was permitted to set in order those who were there. He set them in order as a spider sets its webs, placing himself in the middle, and making paths in every direction, with the command that all should look to him. But that society was swallowed up by the hells which were below. All who are of such a character wish to be in the heavens, and they climb up into high places, where they believe that the exercising of dominion is the delight of life. But use is this. But when they have been explored, they are cast down. They are wanderers. They direct their course from one society to another, often seeking to obtain office. They are distinguished according to their ideas of the divine, as 1, they who have an idea concerning the union with the Father; 2, they who have an idea solely of the Lord's human, and nothing of the divine, although they had known of it; 3, they who have acknowledged 3 persons, and have not made them one God by essence. These are specially distinguished. 4, they who have an idea solely of the Father. These are without a God. 5, they who have not believed in the Lord from eternity. All those are preserved who in the world had acknowledged the divine of the Lord, and had shunned evils as sins, especially those who had acknowledged the divine human, and had approached him. But the rest who had thought of the Lord as of a common man are cast back among the Socinians and Arians, who at first are under the heavens, nearest above the hells, and afterwards are in the hells. They who were in faith alone persecuted me. They brought persecution upon me by bringing me into a state like that in which they themselves were, by means of a like respiration and a like pulse. Thus also into like thought and like affection, and in respect to God and salvation, I was in an obscure cloudiness, as though immersed in water. And it was perceived that I had no communication with heaven, and it was said that they have a similar communication. Many of those who are in faith alone, and had committed nothing of truth and good to life, for the reason that they had rejected all moral life from a spiritual origin, saying that it affects nothing, and that evils do not condemn, and that the Lord had fulfilled the law for them, and had taken away damnation, and that of themselves they cannot do good, still less fulfill the law. Many of these become rebels, and put forth various scandals against the Lord, as is the case with all who have not lived their religion, even if in the world they had not thought wickedly concerning the Lord. They were explored, and it was found that they had committed nothing of truth and good to life, and that they merely knew something from the word, which was like any other scientific matter in which there is nothing vital. And they then appeared without clothing, for clothing signifies the truths of life. And then they understand nothing at all, even as to what was right and just. It was said to them that they had lived without religion, and they were cast into the southern gulf, and were thus carried away. Some of this character were led out of hells in order that they might be transferred to another hell, and it was then permitted them to act according to their will. Then they at once desired to force their way up to higher places by means of fantasies, and they were in the endeavor to do evil. It was recalled to their memory that in hell they had said to each other that if it were allowed them to go out, they would be just as wise as others. Certain ones then spoke with them, saying something of intelligence in which was the light of truth, and when they heard them they were seized with such anguish that they fled away. This was done several times in order that it might be confirmed that such spirits, even when the state is changed, do not sustain the light of truth, thus of intelligence. They said that they were doing them harm, but answer was made that with each other they said otherwise. Hence it was made clear that they who are in hell can never live in the light of heaven, thus in heaven, and least of all in the heat of heaven, which is love. After the judgment, all societies were disposed according to nations, in an admirable order. The order was according to affections in the heavens, and according to cupidities in the hells. They are then straightway purified by means of communications with the evil, and thence as it were by a fermentation, and then the alien are cast down like things heterogeneous. Sometimes the purification is effected by the society becoming like one man. They who are in the man remain, and they who are outside the man are rejected. After the judgment, it is not permitted to thus ascend into heaven and be cast down thence, but each one is determined in such direction that he may go the way that leads to his society. Afterwards, societies were formed most distinctly according to all the genera and species of the affections of good and of truth, and also corresponding infernal societies. All spirits, after they have been vastated, are now led along by designated ways tending to the interior societies which correspond and are analogous to their life, nor are they allowed, as before, to turn aside in any other direction, or to stay in other places, still less to form for themselves societies, and as it were heavens, according to life in externals. It is perhaps believed in the world that man is saved and comes into heavenly societies according to his thoughts, which are of the understanding of truth. But no one is saved according to these, but according to affections and thoughts thence, thus according to the good of the will, and thence the truth of the understanding. For man is man from his will, and his understanding thence, and not from the truth of the understanding separate from the good of the will. The understanding merely teaches how man must will and act. Many are led along the designated ways with difficulty, for they wish to go to the sides, where they are sensible of the presence of the good, both below and above, to whom they are eager to do evil. For all ways are such as are the societies above and below them. The arranging of the reformed after the judgment lasted a long time, for the reason that the word is with them, and the Lord is known, and they are therefore in the middle, and the greatest light is there, which passes from that middle to the peripheries, where are also the Gentiles. On this account the arranging of the reformed lasted a long time. All those are retained in the heavens who have had the delight of some use, or of some function for the sake of use, whether it be the delight of business from sincerity, or of some study, provided only there be the delight of use and the acknowledgment of God. These can be held in order by the Lord, because the Lord inflows into uses. But they who have led a life of idleness, merely in social companies, or in offices solely for their own glory, cannot be ruled by the Lord, and because they are not members of the society considered as a man, they are rejected. There is an application to the function of the blood.